Johnny Mac with your daily comedy news. There is so much to get to again. We got the Louis C.K. thing. We've heard from Chris Rock. Amy Schumer talked about a joke she did not say at the Oscars. Hey, let's start with late night real quick. Jimmy Fallon talked about the 64th annual Grammy Awards, and he said, I think it was a good night overall because nobody was watching the uncensored Japanese version on Twitter, and that's a good thing. Kimmel said Doja Cat nearly missed her acceptance speech because she was using the bathroom. See, this is why they need litter boxes under the seats. I've said it a million times. Jimmy Fallon said it was a fun night, hours and hours of musicians performing for free, or as that's also known, Spotify. Seth Meyers. And I got to say, as a 48-year-old man, I was just happy to see someone at the Grammys whose name I knew. Amen, Seth. All right, let's start here. This was on Chortle by Jen Kirkman, the day Louis C.K. tried to show me his penis. We're going to talk a lot about Jen Kirkman and Louis C.K. today. The day Louis C.K. tried to show me his penis and why Dave Chappelle supporting him is so dangerous. Chortle writes, Jen Kirkman has told of how Louis C.K. tried to expose himself to her and called out Dave Chappelle's support of the shamed comic as dangerous. Kirkman told the story on her latest stand-up album, OK Gen X, that came out last week. Jen Kirkman first mentioned the inappropriate behavior back in 2015, long before CK's conduct became public, but at that time she didn't name him, saying she didn't want to face the backlash. However, she's now chosen to tell the full story, describing her experience as, quote, not a big deal compared to other people, unquote, but part of culture, especially in comedy, that makes life harder for women. She used her routine to mock CK's defense that he always asked for consent from the women he asked to masturbate in front of, as if that were normal behavior for a boss. Kirkman told her audience on the album, people say that's comedy, but not really. People make dirty jokes to each other the same way you do with anyone you're familiar with, but it's still a work environment, and it's a work environment you should be more careful of as it involves nighttime, the dark, and alcohol, and sometimes hotels and traveling. You should actually think more carefully about making sure a woman doesn't feel something scary is about to happen. So this is my quick story about the wonderful time the very thoughtful Louis C.K. asked my consent. I get emotional as it was so sweet of him. She recalled how CK invited her for a drink after a gig in LA at a time when CK was doing well, but before he was super famous. She thought little of it at the time, as it was the same bar comedians would always hang out. They'd hung out a few times, and she knew he was married with kids. Then they headed to an upstairs area separate from the main bar. Kirkman recalled CK said something along the lines of, what if a guy you knew asked if he could, I want to clean this up, do that thing in front of you, what would you say? She said, I thought it was just irreverent enough that it sounded like the way comedians talk. She thought he was trying to work out a new bit, and I was honored that maybe he was asking my opinion on the bit, like some loser guy. Imagine if there was such a loser. I'm trying to think of funny things back, and he's looking at me like, no, what if I really could do that thing? I still didn't get it. I was like, maybe the punchline should be something else. And he was like, Jen, and I go, what? We're not doing a bit? He said, what'd you think this was? And I was like, oh. And then a friend came over and he said, I was just showing Jen pictures of my daughter as he had photos in his pocket. Isn't that the sick part? My complete ignorance of what was happening made it not that fun for him. I think he got off on people being scared. I think I wasn't scared enough, just weird and confused. So it didn't end up happening. She then joked, I really regret it. What was his penis like? Continuing from Chortle, Kirkman said CK continued to make unnecessary comments for several months, but added, I never felt unsafe around him. It's not the end of the world. I still had a great career. I didn't need him for anything. But for women in comedy, there's always a threat of rain, so we carry an umbrella everywhere. Men just get to walk out the door and assume it's going to be sunny. We always have to be aware that the men we work with are trying to get something out of us. I've heard, what'd you think this was? So many times. The little things add up. They don't destroy you, but you have to have different Kevlar on, and it's less fun. It just changes things enough that it taints your experience. She then slammed Dave Chappelle for defending CK, saying that the comic blaming CK's victims for having a, quote, weak-ass spirit was, quote, dangerous for culture, as every time she called out sexual harassment, she would get tweets and hate mail inspired by Chappelle's comments. Going to dive in on that in a minute. Jen Kirkman has tweeted several times this week. I'm going to dive in on her Twitter feed. One of her tweets says, to every media person in my emails today asking me for a comment about Louis C.K., stop asking me. Ask male comedians. Why not ask Patton Oswalt, Judd Apatow, Mark Maron, David Cross, Bo Burnham, Aziz Ansari, Pete Holmes, Rory Scovel, Mike Birbiglia, Doug Benson, Ron Funches. Some more tweets from Jen Kirkman. Unfollowing every male comedian I follow. It's been fun, fellas, but I can't abide anymore. One more. I'm retweeting my harassing comments so any media outlets trolling my feed to publish my tweets about Louis C.K. can see the harassment I get and stop asking women who are in a PTSD situation to talk about them and ask the male comedians or write about how male comedians are silent. I'm on Twitter right now. This is a tweet from Jen Kirkman unfollowing every male comedian I follow. Show this thread. Let's see some of the Oh, I was going to read you some of the comments. I'm now seeing, and this is 12:05 on Tuesday, this tweet has been deleted. Now, why that's unfortunate is I wanted to, and I had it all prepped this morning. I was just going to read them off my phone. I wanted to share some of the comments Jen was getting, and you could see how she is being attacked. All right, here's another tweet from Jen 4 minutes ago, so that'd be about 12:03 on Tuesday. Quote, "Hey, I made a mistake. You guys made mistakes, right? Would you want your whole life ruined because of it? But the thing is, he didn't make a mistake. His behavior was deliberately planned sociopathy, and it hasn't stopped." Another topic completely. "And people who make mistakes are seeing themselves through his eyes, and they're being brainwashed by a sociopath. It's a much, much larger discussion that's not about cancel culture. It's about rape culture." So Jen has been retweeting some of the comments coming in her direction. One from somebody named Dante, who wrote, "Good for Louis C.K. Hard to feel bad for pathetic comedians like this," meaning Jen. "Step 1, has terrible comedy special. Makes fun of Louis C.K. who asked for her consent." Wow. "Step 2, comedy special is terrible. Zero press or buzz." "Step 3, ride his coattails for more attention." "Step 4, stop asking." Somebody named Titan wrote, "It didn't happen at the workplace, though. Unfortunately, it's a tricky situation. Everyone consented. It may have been an abuse of power, but as things are, it wasn't criminal. And he's obviously rehabilitated himself. As I see, I think he's done his time." Juan tweeted, "Get over it, lady." Mo tweeted, "How long is long enough? Y'all can't cancel everybody and everything. Get over it after a while." KT tweets, "Because Louis C.K. deserves the award, man is a legend." Scott tweets, "Don't feel too bad. She herself has been harassing and calling out male comedians for at least 24 hours. Her playing the victim now and fishing for sympathy simply because people shot back at her is nothing short of pathetic. A case of being able to dish it out, but not take it." The Hollywood Reporter has a very insightful article. It asks, how did Louis C.K. win the Grammy anyway, even carrying that baggage? Great breakdown by the Hollywood Reporter. I also shared this full article on the subreddit Daily Comedy News and in the podcast group, Daily Comedy News Podcast Group. The Hollywood Reporter writes, Grammy voters often gravitate towards familiar names, especially in, quote, down ballot categories. This was Louis' 4th nomination and 3rd win in the category. One of only 3 comedians to win 3 times since 2000. The others, George Carlin and Dave Chappelle. The Hollywood Reporter writes, CK also caught a break when the Recording Academy ruled that Bo Burnham's Inside, which was the biggest hit of the year on Billboard's comedy albums chart, didn't meet the criteria to compete in the category. Instead, Bo Burnham's album had to go up against for Best Compilation Soundtrack for Visual Media, a category typically reserved for original music composed for films, TV shows, and video games. It wound up not even being nominated there. The Academy has a new rule in place, informally called the 10/3 rule, which was intended to cut down on the practice of voters roaming around the ballot and voting in categories in which they're not experts. All right, I hadn't been familiar with that rule. I think that rule is a good rule. Let's see. All voting members may vote in the so-called Big Four categories, album, record, and song of the year, plus Best New Artist. After that, they may vote in no more than 10 other categories, chosen from no more than 3 other fields. Best Comedy Album is the only category in the comedy field, so a voter would have had to use up one of their 3 fields to vote. There are 24 fields, not counting the general field. So it's fair to say that voters in the comedy community supported CK despite the controversy. Voters from outside the comedy community weren't likely using up a field just to ding him. All right, let's split that apart. I think that rule is great. So I don't have a vote, but say I did have a vote. I have some expertise in the comedy field. I don't consider myself an expert at all and say, I don't know, Best Global Musical Performance. Not my thing. So I wouldn't vote there. That makes sense. So if you've listened for a few years, you know that I have a stick up my hat about what the Grammys consider an album. Some things that they consider an album, I consider to be really TV specials, but I don't want to bog down in that today because we got a lot to get to. So just accepting that the nominees for Best Comedy Album were Louis C.K. Sincerely, Lavelle Crawford's The Comedy Vaccine, Chelsea Handler's Evolution, Louis Black's Thanks for Risking Your Life, Nate Bargatze's The Greatest Average American, and Kevin Hart's Zero F's Given. Again, putting aside arguing over what is an album or not, if I had a vote between that list, I would have picked Nate Bargatze's The Greatest Average American. Comedian Mona Shaikh, I hope I'm pronouncing your last name right, it's Shaikh, did a guest article in The Hollywood Reporter saying the message this award sends to CK's victims and other female comics and comedy writers is that their cries will fall on deaf ears and might well backfire. It was November 2021. I was in New York City for the New York Comedy Festival when I was invited by a comedian friend to the Comedy Cellar. Being invited was the only way I could have gotten in. It's the only way anyone can get in, by knowing the right people. So there I was, part of the inner circle, claiming a coveted spot among comedians, mingling with other comedians, and sitting across from Louis C.K. I thought, how is this guy allowed at the club after his five-finger shuffle in front of unsuspecting innocent women? After all, this was a prestigious comedy club. It had no shortage of great and famous comedians to put on stage and put butts in seats. Why him? In my many years working as a comic, I understood the business to be a boys' club, men favoring other men, and yet I was surprised to learn that the booker of the club was a woman. I also learned in a 29 interview, she referred to the accusations against CK as, quote, unfortunate, and to offended comedians as, quote, holier than thou. This is the kind of all-too-common mentality female comedians must battle with when dealing with bookers. It started to come together. The boys' club isn't a club of boys, it's a club of people, male and female, who favor boys. Skipping ahead, Mona writes, in comedy, it's still a good time to be a sexual abuser. The message this award sends to CK's victims and other female comics and comedy writers is that their cries will fall on deaf ears and might well backfire. Not just because men in the industry are supporting other men, but because the system is broken. The comedy establishment sends a dog whistle to sexual predators, forgiving their abusive actions as long as they offer a superficial apology, often drafted by their publicists, and go underground for a year or so. After that, they emerge and revive their careers. It's assumed they've changed, even though there's no evidence of change. Meanwhile, female comics are given no such benefit, no such breaks. It's a slap in the face of all the brave women who came forward, risking their careers and reputations to rid the industry of toxic behavior. Why is Louis C.K. given a pass when many women comics aren't even let in the door? What exactly is wrong with the system? It boils down to the gatekeepers. In comedy, to be given opportunities, you need to perform at clubs. Perform at clubs, you have to be selected. Bookers decide who gets exposure. By allowing Louis C.K. to continue performing at their clubs, they're essentially enabling him to have a chance at success, no matter how many sexual abuses of power he commits. And by deciding not to nurture female comedians, no matter how good they are, the bookers are essentially deciding that those women won't have careers. When I sat across Louis C.K. at the Comedy Cellar, I thought to myself, this guy has two daughters. His lack of empathy is pretty jarring if that alone doesn't open his eyes. But when I think about how the world he works in, the world that supports and nurtures him, carries the same lack of empathy, then it makes sense. In life, you get what you tolerate, and we don't want to tolerate this anymore. All right, that's a lot for the first half there. Let's come back and we'll talk Chris Rock. From The Hollywood Reporter, Kenny Rock, that's Chris's younger brother, he's weighing in on the slap. Kenny Rock talked to the LA Times, said, it eats at me watching it over and over again because you've seen a loved one being attacked and there's nothing you can do about it. He said Chris was no threat to Smith, who had no respect for Chris in that moment and belittled him in front of the millions of Oscars viewers. I might have looked at it differently had he initially apologized when he got on stage and cried and accepted the award, but he didn't. So right there tells me that this is something else. The joke was funny. It wasn't hilariously funny, but I know that if he knew that she had alopecia, he wouldn't have made a joke about that, but he didn't know. Chris Rock performed at the Borgata in Atlantic City over the weekend. Ticket resellers were getting as much as $1,000 a ticket for Saturday's show. Wow. Philly Mag says those who had already bought their tickets were greeted with long lines and frustration at Borgata. Many fans had to wait in line at the box office, or rather wait in line to get to the box office since the long line snaked around the casino floor just to pick up will call tickets. There were also the fans that had bought digital tickets who learned upon arriving that they had to wait in line to exchange those digital tickets for paper tickets. That doesn't make any sense to me. One digital ticket holder told Philly Mag, I love Chris Rock, but this S is ridiculous. Then there was the waiting in line to get to the 2,400 seat venue. See, this is why going to a live show, and I don't just mean comedy, I mean everything now, is such a pain in the neck. We've all got 70-inch high-def TVs. Just stay home is sometimes the right thing to do. There was one security line that fed fans through metal detectors. Then there was yet another line where fans had to lock their cell phones inside yonder pouches. I hate that. Many seem displeased with the no phones policy. I spent $600 on 2 tickets and can't even get a picture of Chris Rock, said one disgruntled woman described to have a thick New York accent. The first show was scheduled to start at 7. Chris Rock took the stage at 8. That's annoying as well, but Philly Mag speculates that was likely due in no small part to the fact there were still hundreds of fans waiting in the aforementioned lines 30 minutes after the scheduled start time. Fans grew audibly annoyed as the minutes ticked by, but the grunts and groans dissipated as soon as Chris Rock came out. He repeated the line from the Boston shows, I had a whole show written long before that S went down. That got limited enthusiasm, says Philly Mag. Philly Mag adds, the man seated to my right later told me he was disappointed that Rock didn't talk about the Oscar slap and said he only came to hear about that. But things picked up once Rock launched into a scripted material which touched on everything from AIDS to Ukraine to Lululemon to parenting. Rock made it through an anti-Trump tirade at one point yelling F Trump without anybody in the audience firing back at him. The only time the audience seemed to collectively cringe was when Chris Rock tackled abortion. He mocked the notion of a safe abortion, noting that a safe abortion is an abortion where only one person dies, I guess. As for his own stance on abortion, Rock joked he's not pro-choice, but pro-better choice. Ladies, if you have to pay for your own abortion, get an abortion. Leave these minimum wage penises alone. From the Daily Mail, Jada Pinkett Smith wishes Will Smith didn't get physical with Chris Rock, but isn't angry with her husband. The couple is apparently in agreement that Smith, quote, overreacted and are, quotes, all about their family and their kids. An insider told Us Weekly it was in the heat of the moment and it was him overreacting. He knows that, she knows that. They're in agreement that he overreacted. They also said Pinkett Smith is not a wallflower nor one of those women that needs protecting. He didn't need to do what he did. Chelsea Handler praised Chris Rock, saying he was a professional. It wasn't necessary to be reactive. I think the reaction is heard now and it's appropriate and people have really felt for him. I feel for him. He's an incredible guy. I love the way he handled it and respect him even more. Chelsea's boyfriend Joe Coy said, I can't wait for Chris's take on it. It's going to be serious and funny at the same time. He's the king and he showed everybody why he's the king. It was beautiful what he did. Shaquille O'Neal weighed in because why not? Shaq said, this all goes back to 2016. Quoting Shaq, I'm hearing from the streets that Will seen Chris and said, hey man, chill out on that. Haha, let it go. Chris kind of blew him off. But still, if somebody's blowing me off, I got him in that foul. And I've always said that a man's job is to PPL. If you go back to the tape, because you know I like to be my own detective, Will laughed, he laughed, and then Jada, and then Shaq made a face. That's when PPL kicks in. Because all you married guys know, unhappy wife, unhappy life. Now that he saw Jada uncomfortable, he was like, I'm probably going to have to deal with this at home. I told that boy to chill out, and now he's disrespecting me. He went up and did what he had to do. And we've learned some of the jokes Amy Schumer did not say at the Oscars. One of them, Don't Look Up is the name of a movie? More like Don't Look Down the Barrel of Alec Baldwin's Shotgun. Little rough, not that funny. She probably would have told it better. Some of the other jokes, now I haven't seen the detailed jokes, but apparently she dropped things about James Franco and Joe Rogan. Amy said, I wasn't allowed to say any of that, but you can just come up and slap someone. Follow this show for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Overcast, wherever you get your shows. If you would like the show without commercials and early releases, become a premium subscriber for $5 a month on Apple Podcasts. Whew. Things do not slow down around here. All right, see you tomorrow.